This podcast is proudly sponsored by Philips OLED Plus Ambilight TV. OLED Plus is the name given to the multi-award-winning combination of the latest and best OLED panel technology, enhanced Philips P5 dual-engine picture processing, the next generation of Philips Ambilight, plus superb sound by Bowers & Wilkins. Philips OLED Plus delivers the best TV picture and sound quality as an immersive performance unmatched in the premium TV market. Discover more at www.philips.com/OLED.
Hello and welcome to the AVForums Movies podcast for Monday, the 5th of December, 2022. Tonight I'm joined by Simon Crust.
It seems like it was only a week ago.
Yeah, it was. And Mark Costello.
A week is far too long, Simon, without you.
Oh,
As well as our very special guest star, David Mackenzie.
Thanks for having me here. I'm delighted to know I'm very special. It's quite the flattering intro.
It'll only get worse, David. Trust me.
Yeah.
Oh,
Just wait. We're gonna basically skip over the competitions, but I did want to highlight that we are doing a bunch of Christmas competitions. We're doing a 50 Blu-ray Christmas giveaway for all our kind supporters. Everyone gets a prize. Well, everyone who enters gets a prize. And there are a number of 4K competitions available and Scalextric sets and all kinds of juicy prizes. So head on over and fill your boots. But we're going to jump straight in. And David here has his own company, Fidelity in Motion, and has worked on a number of projects. I'm just going to read out a whole list here, just so people know, listening in and watching. We've got Fifth Element, Tremors, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Flash Gordon, as you can tell, Elephant Man.
are you a fan by any chance?
Yes, I covered that and love the disc.
His
And
middle name's Ming.
Yeah, I do like the Hot Hail. I still can't quite get that on the weather report, but Fear and Loathing, Angel Heart, another favorite. I mean, there's reportedly thousands. I can't see.
I've never heard of any of them.
Thousands, but there's thousands, and
It's also not been updated in a while. So yeah, the whole day in day out of actually getting this stuff onto disc takes priority.
it's been going for a minute, I guess. But back in the day, originally, you worked with us, many a decade ago. I think you went to Simon's house. I've got in notes here with Phil.
you did.
That was after the Bristol Hi-Fi
That was
show,
after
wasn't
Bristol,
it?
yeah.
And you were playing one of because I run a company now, I can't, I have to be diplomatic about it, but you were playing a certain sci-fi movie, and it was the PAL DVD version. I was looking at it going, why have they done that? I'm not going to get into more specifics. I remember this well. Yeah.
So
At least it wasn't the usual stuff Simon has playing, David.
Oh, okay.
What I mean.
Did you brought up the special movies just for me? I'm glad to hear that. Just for me and Phil. But that's right. No, back in the day, that was I think we started writing reviews for AVForums in 2008. It must have been.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I mean, I always like to use this phrase. I've had my fingers in a whole bunch of. The fancy way of saying it is I like to have a holistic understanding of what's going on in film and video. But the better way of saying it is I've had my fingers in a couple of different AV related pies for a while, just because it's a personality trait. I don't like. I don't like focusing too myopically in one part of an industry. You can specialize in something, but it helps to know what's going on in the display technology world. But I've written for a bunch of sites. AVForums is probably the biggest known for hardware reviews, and here I am.
You were reviewing and calibrating TVs, I think, back
That's right.
as well. Yeah, and so you went from that. How did you go from that to forming your own company?
Well, they were kind of concurrent. I was doing tests with MPEG-2 encoding, around 2000, 2001. Back when DVD was the thing, and to learn this stuff, you can't take a DVD, right, and something that's already been MPEG-2 encoded, and just recompress it, because the source is already selling. You need to have some sort of uncompressed or differently compressed source to work with. So back then, 2000, 2001, what I would do is, just for the fun of it, really, just to learn how this stuff worked, was digitize laser discs or analog TV signals and encode those to DVD. And when I was first started doing that, this was obviously, DVD was it wasn't at the peak yet. DVD was taking off around that time. And what most compression and authoring facilities were doing would be, the process would be to use a room full of hardware MPEG-2 encoders, which would work in real time and be fed by the tape deck.
Yeah.
And of course, I was like 14 or 15 at the time. I didn't have access to a room full of hardware encoders and tape deck, so I was doing everything in software, which was a million times slower, but actually is better, because for all the calculations that are required to throw away a lot of the original uncompressed video data, it really helps to be able to give the machine as much time as it needs to do that. So what I'm saying is, by the way, tell me if I ever go off on tangents. I can spit more fires about this stuff. So the software version is better. So anyway, what I started noticing was that these recordings I'd captured to hard disk live over the air or from Laserdisc or whatever. Of course, they had composite video artifacts in them, so they weren't perfect source, but in some ways they actually looked higher res than official DVDs did. And I thought, well, how is that the case? This isn't right. And if you want, I can go into the answer as to why. But anyway, the bottom line is that I had a lot of experience doing that kind of stuff already before I was able to work in a commercial disc. When I was working with the likes of AVForums, for example, that really helped, because it meant that if there was some display device or player that was doing something weird to the video, I could just make a test pattern and encode it for disk and run it through the display and see what was going on with it. So, but what was your question? How did the answer?
How did it become a company? But I think you've told us.
How did it become a company? I mean, one of the other, sorry to preempt it, I think one of the other questions you're going to ask me is what was the first title Fidelity in Motion did? Yeah. I actually can't remember, because it was the whole distinction for me of like forming the corporate structure of a company.
Yes.
That's really not that significant in my mind. That was really just a formality. I think the answer I should give you is, I've been doing this stuff for fun for a long time, and then around 2006, I got the opportunity to, well, originally what was meant to happen. Sorry, I'm going all over the place. I worked with this little company called Dolby Vision, which put out these releases of movies by a director called Andrzej Żuławski. And there was this, the guy who runs that company is like a real fan of this guy's work. And he found me on the internet, on a forum somewhere. It may even have been AVForums, I don't know, complaining about the certain practices that were in use on Hollywood DVDs at the time. And he decided that he asked me to come in and help him and advise him on what to do to get the best result out of a DVD. And at first I had a real sense of imposter syndrome, because I'm like, well, I mean, thanks for asking, but surely there's someone better suited to this job. But then it actually turned out not to be the case, because these are, you can probably tell from the guy's name, these are European movies, right? So the existing masters were PAL. I don't know if the digital Betacam means anything to you. The digital Betacam was like a very high quality standard studio master tape format that was in use by pretty much all the TV industry around the time. And it was PAL. And he'd taken it to this DVD authoring facility in Burbank, California. And they were all set to run it through a standards converter to turn it into NTSC for something that could be sold in the USA. But they were actually about to use the wrong method. They were very proud of the fact that they had this standards converter called the Alchemist, it's a British machine actually produced by this company called Snell and Wilcox. And I don't know if you remember what bad standards conversions look like for if you were going from 60 images per second for the NTSC countries down to 50. And if there was ever a camera pan, you get this sort of horrible shuddering, like a sort of double image effect. And are you fans of Brass Eye by any chance? Do you remember do you remember the Fatanoid skits on Brass Eye? Basically take that effect and turn it up to 11. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about British comedy. But that's the best example of it. Well, anyway, Alchemist is a really high quality standards converter that would essentially resample the images into the proper time base for NTSC. And it's the best machine in its class, but it's the wrong machine for the job. And I told them, well, no, this is film material. All you have to do, I'm sure you're aware of PAL speed up, right? All you have to do for taking film material down to NTSC is not you don't touch the pictures themselves except for rescaling them down to the smaller resolution. Don't touch those. You just have to change the rate at which they're played. So you're starting on the wrong foot here. Yes, it's a brilliant machine, but it's the wrong tool for the job. You can get a much better result by doing something much simpler. And anyway, long story short, this post facility didn't much like some snot-nosed kid telling them what to do. And the end result of that was they came to me and said, well, can you do the DVD authoring? And I said, sure. So
give me a million.
Well, that was my, of course, a million. That was my first kind of professional gig. And, things were learned, but by that point I had the video encoding stuff down. And basically had to find a way to figure out how to author discs very quickly.
Nice. What's your earliest, most memorable title then, if you can't remember the first?
Oh, I can remember the first. It was this French movie called La Femme Publique, and it has Valerie Caprisky in it, and I can't watch it to this day, not because it's bad, but because it's back at that point, like each project is your only project, right? So I've seen that. I remember watching that more times than I could remember.
Oh, no.
More times than I care to remember. And that's often the way it goes with these projects, actually, is it helps to have been a fan of the movie before you start working. If it's a very involved project, it helps to have been a fan of it before you work on it, because chances are by the end, you probably won't want to look at it again for a while. There are exceptions, but yeah.
Nice. I mean, in as far as we're all concerned, and as far as I can tell from the forums as well, you've got such a reputation that people won't quote FIM as much as they will say that's a Dave M encode.
The Dave M mark of quality.
Really, that's what I hear a lot, and it's been going on for a while. I mean, you got to tell us a little bit about the magic you work to get these.
I mean, that stuff's really flattering, but I'm not the only person who's doing a good work in this field. I mean, I don't think I've ever put anything out that's bad. So there's that, and that the same can't be said, I guess, of all places. So thank you very much is what I'm saying. But there's what was the question? What's the process? Or
I mean, like, what does it take? How is it that you don't think you've put anything bad on? I mean, there must be some QA in there. There must be some reason why discs that have your stamp, in inverted commas, on them end up looking pretty good, whereas discs that don't are a bit more hit and miss.
So I think it's an eye for detail mainly, because if you can look at I do a lot of A/Bing the original master against various different codes. So in terms of compression, one of the first things that we do when something comes in, other than the mundane stuff like ingest it, get it onto storage so we can all access it, I'll find a part of the movie that's like a representative sample of most of the film. And for most films, that's usually the grain structure. They're all usually shot on like the same type of stock, right? So most of the film has a very similar texture to it. So finding a representative sample, usually I'll pick a scene that looks like it might be difficult, and really that just comes from experience, knowing the sort of thing that's going to chew the encoder up. And encode it with a whole bunch of different parameters. There's the one everyone fixates on is bitrate, of course, but that's really not much of a moving target like on optical media. Like, the best thing about it is that you have a 12 centimeter disc, right? And obviously the length of the movie is set in stone. Whatever bonus features the client wants in there is set in stone. But how you allocate that space is really up to you. I'm going from the tangent again. You asked me to describe the process. Doing a whole bunch of different encode comparisons on little test sections of the movie. And then just going through them by eye and putting them up on I've got an OLED sitting on my desk, and I'll run them all together and just press my nose up against the screen and look for the minute differences. And sometimes actually it can be right away, some of them are just no good. Like, okay, that doesn't work for this content.
Yeah.
Like there are certain features in video compression codecs that they might be very effective for compressing like podcast video that we have on the screen now, but they won't work very well for film. And then of course the decisions the colorist makes can change stuff. The whatever film scanner it was scanned on can change the look and feel of the picture. So you also kind of have to have an eye for detail like that and know be able to know like what should we focus on here? If something has to give, as it always does in lossy compressed video, what should we be focusing on? For example, a couple of years ago now, I was doing these spaghetti Western titles for Arrow. And those are shot in 2perf, right? So the actual resolution is not as good as like other types of 35 millimeter. But something that really gave the image character was the colored film grain was quite intense. So for those titles specifically, I lowered the amount of quantization, which quantization I can get into later. But that basically means the amount of distortion that's required to save on bits. I would lower the amount for those titles. I'd lower the amount of how heavily the chroma channels were distorted versus the luma, because that was giving it some more of its character. Again, I think I could go on for hours like that, but it's basically eye for detail, a lot of experimentation. And also, like I kind of alluded to before with like I was talking about doing stuff in software, everything is done in software these days well, not everything, but for optical media, everything is done in software. There are hardware encoders that work in real time for TV broadcast where the picture has to be live, right? But everything's done here in software using really, really slow. It's not good because it's slow, but basically allowing the machine as much time as it needs within reason to do all the possible calculations to find the best matches in the picture and to store it in the most efficient way, which in turn usually means it's higher quality.
Which is what you learned that worked.
So is this done on a scene-by-scene basis, or once you found the code, that's it, you'd run for the whole thing?
Sort of. So if you get really lucky, this is in the early days of Blu-ray, where the film transfer technology wasn't as good. If you have a master from that era, and I'm talking about BD here, not UHD BD. By the way, my image is frozen. Can you still see me? It's just low. Streaming video, who'd have it, right?
Bad
I hope you can still hear me okay.
Yeah.
Tell me if I break up at any point. Sorry, what was the question again? The scene by scene.
So do you on a scene by scene basis?
So if you get lucky, if it's an older transfer and it was done on like an older type of film transfer device, which doesn't retain as much of the high frequencies, like that, the smallest details from the picture, you can sometimes get away with like a one and done. The thing is with UHD Blu-ray, most of what we're working with is new 4K scans off of the original camera negative, which have a ton of detail in them. So you can get away. I don't think I've done a single UHD Blu-ray title that hasn't needed fixes to its best. So to answer your question, it's not like we're adjusting every single scene, but there will usually be some sore point in the film that needs some extra attention.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of in between the two.
Okay,
excellent. And I suppose, David, just to we've jumped right in, haven't we? And I suppose to sort of step back a little bit, encoding in essence is the alchemy of getting a pint into a half pint pot. You have a film that is massive and you have to get it on a 12-inch disc.
Yes.
How? Just how? I mean, you've talked a lot about software and all this kind of stuff, but for us idiots out there, for us very, very laymen, What exactly is encoding? And I suppose the end point of that question is, and how can it have such an impact on the picture quality that we see on those discs?
We're getting a live example of it right now, actually, from a message from Stuart here saying, my internet connection appears to be choked. So apologies for that. There's not a lot that you can still hear me. It's the important part. If I try and change networks now, it's probably going to kick me off completely. So we might have to cross our fingers and hope for the best. How does it make it? What is encoding? In this context, it means compression, which is basically all the work that's needed to take, as you alluded to, some gigantic master that there's no way it could be distributed or enjoyed by consumers, and getting onto a consumer format. So I actually, every time I talk about the subject, I have it here somewhere, every time I talk about the subject, I always wished I had the actual numbers. And for once, I actually do. So here we go. Here's one we made earlier. If we're talking uncompressed video, YCDCR, not even RGB. We can have long discussions about whether YCDCR versus RGB is a form of compression. Not on its own. For full resolution 444 YCDCR, it's about 50 UHD resolution. It's about 50 megabytes a frame. The bit rate is measured in gigabits per second, not megabits. So a 2-hour film in that format would be about 8.6 terabytes.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's about 8,000. Wow. We have the whole binary versus the 1,000 versus 1,024 thing, but roughly speaking, I mean it's so huge compared to what goes on disk. It's probably not worth splitting hairs over. So 8,600 gigabytes, and for UHD Blu-ray, as you'll know, the biggest capacity disk is 100. So then, of course, remember there's other stuff on there but the movie. So you have audio tracks, especially if it's like one of those European SKUs where you have a whole bunch of dubbed audio tracks on as well. The video is going to be occupying less than 100 gigs. So if you say it's about 90 gigs, if my maths is correct, and it may well not be, the file size has to shrink by about 99%. So
is that all?
Yeah, or more. So the whole kind of elevator sales pitch is it has to lose 99% of the quality, but look, 99% is good. 99, 98, there's a lot of data being thrown away and approximated by other means. So the codec has a lot of work to do in identifying parts of the picture that are redundant, both spatially and temporally, which means spatially within one frame and temporally across time. So, I mean, the perfect example, like the best example of spatial redundancy you can get is like, imagine a picture and there's like a blue sky, right? Most of that blue sky is similar, and I'm not within the frame, within a single frame. Most of the blue sky is very similar. Most of the top half of the image is incredibly similar to the mix. So it can be the codec will break the image down into blocks and compare them to each other, and save a ton of bandwidth that way. And of course, then when you add motion into that, the motion is represented in a more efficient way. So say, for example, the camera pans, the codec will be able to match blocks from a previous frame and assign motion vectors to them and say, okay, that frame, that block, this part of the picture is like that part of the picture 3 frames ago. Copy that, put it here, and change it a little bit. So that's really that's really the heart of it, of the video compression stuff.
Fantastic. And you've already alluded to this. Us AV fans, we don't like any of this subjective nonsense. We're fans of objective evidence. And of course, the biggest of that is numbers. And of course, the bigger the number, the better. So when we're talking about discs and encodes, we're talking, I'm not buying a 66 gig disc. It's rubbish. It's got to be 100 gig disc. Or similarly, this encode's terrible. The megabit per second doesn't get above 50. So in terms of all of this, insane rhetoric that we're all guilty of at times, I take it it's never quite that black and white. Bigger numbers do not always equal the best picture quality. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, if you have a mistake that I originally made when I was on the other side of the fence in terms of consuming the stuff and not working on it, I always had the impression that a master would be absolutely perfect. Any sort of flaw in there would be the result of what had been done to put it on disk or stream or whatever. and that's not really the case. Garbage in, garbage out applies.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing more and more also with films these days is that you don't have to shoot. They don't necessarily have to shoot in one type of camera. Like I did Drive for a second sight, the Ryan Gosling movie, not the Asian movie. I did that too, but Drive, I'm talking about specifically. There's a shot in there. Yeah, there's a shot in there. I think was shot in an iPhone, like they use, or a DSLR. I think it was used as a crash cam. So if they're about to drive a car on fire in front of the camera, they're not going to put the Arri Alexa down. They're going to put in an iPhone or a Canon 5D or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it's like a 3-second shot, blink and you miss it. So what I'm saying is the source isn't always perfect either. Since we're on the subject of disk size, Drive actually for that title I set. Usually, if there's a title where the studio's asked, like, can you get this onto a 66, and it really needs a 100, like 98% of the time, if I say no, this isn't enough, they'll let me use the higher capacity disk. Like they'll take my word on it.
Oh,
Drive
nice.
is on a 6. No, yeah, no, it's like
power.
Well, they obviously want the best result too, and they don't want people on web forums complaining about the disk size anymore.
But people don't do that, do they, David?
No, of course. But I mean, it's funny because you mentioned we're on the subject of Drive being in a 66. I saw one reviewer who said, it's great, but I wish they put it on a 100 because it would look even better. And no, because that title's a 2K upscale, right? It was shot in the first gen Alexa, I think. So there's one of what I didn't get onto before. I was talking about spatial and temporal redundancy and prediction and all that stuff. One of the key parts of what makes the NEV MPEG centric codecs like MPEG 2, AVC, HEVC, what makes them tick is a process called quantization. So the image gets transformed into out of the spatial domain, which just means the spatial domain in this case just means pixel values, right? Like here's pixel, here's pixel. It gets transformed into the frequency domain, which basically means that that enables the codec to up the level of quantization, which just means that very, very, very tiny details that you can't really see that well can get dropped. And bitrate versus quantization is a big deal because obviously all end users are focused on the bitrate. Because the player can show it, right?
As you say, we can see it, we can measure it.
See that, right? But in order to find out the level of quantization that was applied, you would need to compare it to the source, which obviously the consumer doesn't have. So these two things are very related, but they're not a one-to-one. For example, you can have usually a very high bit rate will mean very low quantization because they one affects the other, but there can be cases where you have a very low bit rate, but very low quantization. Like for example, if you have like white text and a black background that's digital, there's really nothing to compress. So there would be no point in David Mackenzie presents in Arial, 10-point white text and black background. There'd be no point in that being 90 megabits per second. That will probably encode like 300 kbits per second and be perfect or close to perfect. And then of course there can be instances where you can have a very high bit rate, but the level of quantization is still very high. Like the best example is that HBO opening logo with the static, which I think they phased out now or severely cut down the length of, because probably for that very reason. So anyway, these concepts are related, and it's a shame we can't, like consumers aren't more aware of that, because in the case of a 2K upscale, the level of quantization to get it onto a 66 gig disk and the level of quantization needed to get it onto a 100 gigabyte disk would be so similar. It would basically be a waste of money for the studio to pay for the bigger disk in that case. Now, if it had been shot on 35 millimeter and scan of the original camera negative, and it was really grainy with very, very sharp film grain, absolutely, it would probably be worth putting on a 100 gig disk. But there can be a fixation on, put it this way, a bigger disk is never worse from a consumer standpoint, except for the fact that if the studio is spending all their, I don't have insight into the way that they're making these decisions necessarily in terms of money, but I mean, if you're going to waste money on 100 gig disks where they aren't necessary, that's money that could eventually be put, towards releasing more movies,
Yeah,
or
remaster,
saving the money for 100 gig discs where they're especially needed. The other thing on that subject is that, and I've done this before in the past as well, but as a consumer, you're kind of looking at it, well, obviously from the other side of the wall to the people who are working on it. And one of these reviews, it was the same review of a Drive, said, well, there's one scene in that film where the picture gets really, really soft and the bitrate gets quite low. It goes down to like 30. That's just an example of why they should have put it on a 100 gig disc. And actually, they had it backwards. The reason the picture was soft was because they'd zoomed into it in post. And the reason the bitrate was lower in that scene is because it could be lower. The encoder assigned it intelligently and saved the bits for elsewhere in the movie where they were more needed. So it wasn't a case of, what I'm saying here is you can look at this stuff backwards, and there's, I don't know where I was going with that. Ask me another question. I'm rambling.
No. I mean, that makes total sense. That reviewers second guess. But
it's absolutely fascinating, though, isn't it? Because you can go on the internet forums, you can see these graphs of the compression
bit rate
and the bit rate graphs, and of course everyone always goes, well, look at that one, and I think Studio Canal are a good example of this. Some of their encodes that they fluctuate, and I think I just did the new Kong 76 4K one, and I had a look at that, and it fluctuates, and you think, well, something must be amiss, but you're looking at the picture and you're going, looks fine to me. Looks absolutely fine to me.
So obviously I didn't work on that title, so I can't comment.
No, we can tell.
Oh, well, no. I'm sure it looks the best it ever has in video. The bitrate will, the level of quantization, the bitrate will obviously fluctuate because no two images are very much alike. Film grain is the great equalizer, because when you have a blanket of grain on top of the whole image, that obviously adds a level of complexity to every shot. But of course, there's softer grain in brighter lit shots and coarser grain in darker ones. So it'll still vary. And then of course, like even something as simple as the texture can be changed even by something as simple as stabilizing the image in post. So one of the more recent titles I worked on was the whole box set of Dawn of the Dead. And that needed this was affected by the type of film scanner it had been scanned on. All the stabilization work was done in post, which means that it wasn't pin registered scan. It was done for reasons that they're outside the scope of discussion here, but basically matching the best type of scanner to the filming scan. And if once you stabilize the image in post, you actually lose a tiny bit of resolution on some frames, because it's not just shifting the image around pixel by pixel, because that would result in a little bit of wobble. Pardon me, got a cough here. That would still produce visible wobble. There's subpixel scaling going on, and the frames that have been subpixel scaled look a tiny bit softer than ones that haven't been, because it's been resampled. It's not natural is best, is what I'm saying. That can affect us too. Yeah.
So speaking of sort of bit rates, we're talking about the luxury of a 100 gig disc, but there's so much work going on now around compressed streams and the streaming world. And so in terms of approaching encoding, does it differ? Does the process differ? Do the things that you guys have to do to get the image to the consumers differ if it's going on disk or if it's going out streaming wise?
Really, the only thing that's the same is the codec. The parameters are different. The biggest difference, and again, I'm not an unbiased source here because I don't really work with streaming, but the number one thing with optical disc is that what goes on there is probably going to outlive us. So polycarbonate lasts for a while, right? So whereas with streaming, it's more of a sort of ephemeral thing. And I'm not saying that means that all streaming is not going to look good. That's not the case at all.
No.
But the mentality is different. Like, we get one shot to put this in the disc. So and also the other thing with streaming is that when a streaming platform encodes a title, it'll be done in a more automated way. They have to produce streams that are compliant with old mobile phones, old Roku boxes from 2010. up to the latest smart TVs that have all the new decoders inside them. So they're outputting. I actually don't know. Netflix have a tech blog that has this info on it, but they're outputting various different streams all from one master. And I think it's fairly rare for Netflix's tech blog, for example. They made a big deal when they started talking about, hey, we've introduced title-specific encodes or scene-specific encode settings. Whereas with optical media, that's kind of every title.
That's the day job.
Right. So again, I don't want to put words in anyone else's mouth, but it's a different product, and it's going to be hopefully subjected to a higher level of QC, because once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other differences are with disc. You obviously have the thing that's fixed and set in stone is you have a 12-centimeter optical disc, right? There is no point in, doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I don't think very often for titles here. Usually anything that leaves here, the disc is full, because it costs the same to stamp, to manufacture a 12-centimeter UHD Blu-ray that's half full, the number of layers notwithstanding, versus one that's full. So you might as well just fill the thing up. What we do first actually is here's the thing with bit budgeting for UHD Blu-ray versus Blu-ray. We got really spoiled in the Blu-ray days because, the maximum disc size is 50 gigs. And the maximum video bit rate is 140 megabits per second. We're talking about megabits versus gigabytes, not the same thing at all. But what I'm saying is you can encode a movie for BD at full max bit rate allowed and still not fill the disc unless it's really long. Whereas with UHD Blu-ray, the maximum video bit rate for the video alone is 100, and the maximum disc size is 100. So you can very quickly fill up a UHD BD. And so bit budgeting comes into play a lot more, especially when you start throwing bonus features into the mix. So honestly, a lot of what I'm doing here is optimizing bonus features. Like I put together a process where if you have a video interview with a director, for example, the video part is obviously going to be shot on hopefully some high-end, video camera.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if that gets noise reduced to lower the bandwidth. Then the clips from the movie pass through untouched. So there's some intelligent stuff going on in the sound, like processes that split a piece of video down into, it's okay, you can filter this, but leave this part alone. Anyway, so once you have all the bonus features into the lowest bandwidth possible, you've got everything left for the movie, right? So anyway, sorry, you asked about streaming.
Take the tangent.
Different animals, same codec, basically. Whereas with streaming, like there's always going to be network delivery of content being what it is. I mean, look at this. We're trying to have a conversation now, and my video is frozen. What is it? In a way, I wish it didn't happen, but in a way, it's perfect. It illustrates my point perfectly. Over a network, you're always going to be bandwidth constrained, and there's always going to be an impetus. And until we live in a future where we have, ample bandwidth, that just where we don't even have to worry about this stuff anymore. The impetus is always going to be on there to reduce the bandwidth as much as possible. I mean, I saw, again, I'm not picking on any one, but they're very open about Netflix had this great tech blog where they were saying, hey, look, this is back in 2020. And they said, hey, look, we have the same picture quality, but we reduced the bandwidth by half. Whereas from an optical media standpoint, the bit rate, right, exactly. I think not everyone was convinced, but from an optical media standpoint, the 12-centimeter disc size does not change.
Yeah.
So if we do R&D work into getting the best compression possible. Whereas this helps. After all my spitballing, this helps sum it up more succinctly. If we were a streaming platform, we would be doing R&D work to save bandwidth. With optical media, we're doing R&D work to use the same bit rate to get higher quality.
Yes, excellent. Very succinct.
Very nice. Yes. There's, it sounds to me like space is the biggest problem you face. Would you agree with that, or is there something else that you might think is the biggest problem that you have?
The biggest problem we have is time.
Getting
time. Because encoding HEVC at the highest quality is slow. It's with 4K images, it's really slow. So it's not.
What is slow, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, the put it this way: the encode time is at really high quality is measured in seconds per frame, not frames per second. So it's slow. So you need like multiple machines working away on a film to get it out in any reasonable length of time. And of course, then you have retakes. You have the stuff that didn't come out correctly the first time. So you have to, after you've done the initial encode, you have to then break it down into isolate the troublesome spots and do those separately.
Yeah,
it all takes a lot more time, and you can get into situations where it's like, well, what's better here? Do we encode at the highest possible quality setting, or do we encode it with the second best one? The second best one, if you are really time constrained, can actually end up being better because it means that you have more time to fine tune stuff. Fortunately, these days with the CPUs getting faster and faster, we don't have to make decisions like that anymore. The encode speed is really, really slow when you're doing. I mean, if you wanted, you could lower the quality of the encode, which in this context means lower the precision of the motion estimation calculations and do an encode overnight and be ready to go on disk. But that's not why I'm as a company. So it's kind of in the name, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, are there any telltale signs of a bad encode then?
Yes, actually, I emailed Stuart some pictures here. Now I don't know because we're having technical difficulties with my video part. If these are still going to, these are coming from him, so hopefully they're not. But sir, could you queue up? It's called badexample.png. By the way, these are all very non-specific images. They're from like test sequences and stuff, and other non-specific. I know it'd be much more fun to. See screen grabs of Bruce Willis kicking aliens, but there's we have to work with what we have, right? Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so now here's the thing. Here's the caveat with this. We're going out over a compressed video connection, so you're seeing compression on top of compression. But if you zoom in all the way to that, we can hopefully mitigate the effects. I mean, can you see? You can tell that doesn't look like film grain very much, right? Or can you? I'm not sure. Because I can't see what you're seeing. Basically, I'll describe it with words in case it isn't coming through visually. Basically, the texture isn't organic. You can see a lot of digital patterns in it.
Yeah,
it's not a fully random.
Yeah.
It's not a fully random pattern anymore. And then if you go on to bad example fixed, you can see what it looked like after I'd done work on it. Does that come through? There you go. So again, this stuff's very hard. If you jump back and forth, you can hopefully see it, but it's very, I can see it really clearly in this end, but it's really hard to demonstrate over compressed feed. So anyway, that's what bad compression would be like. Basically, there's a common misconception, even among like some industry people, that when the compression doesn't work properly, it adds noise to the picture, and that's not true at all. Because of the way the data is approximated and reduced in the frequency domain, it doesn't add noise, it strips out details. So if the compression isn't good, you're going to see like the film grain is going to start looking really sludgy, almost like wallpaper paste. That was the way I always describe it. With HEVC in particular, the grain will take on a sort of kind of gauzy texture. It almost looks like, you've got a gauze bandage and you're stretching it out thin and starting to see the holes. The bottom line is that the grain, things can look blocky and unnatural is the way to put it, I guess. Oh, and by the way, the bad example, the examples I just showed, same bitrate. It's just the image was different encode settings and the image was treated slightly differently.
Okay, so that's bad. Let's talk about something that's good or something that's best, perhaps. Do you have a best film that you've worked on?
I don't know about best. I have probably the favorite. I have two favorite. One of the favorite things I worked on that isn't a film is the Spurs and Wenzel test disc, and I didn't do actually any of the compression on that. That was all authoring. I can go into the difference later. For a more obvious example, I've got a real soft spot for Fifth Element. I am a former hardware reviewer, right? So if we're going to use that for that purpose, I just love that film. It's like the version I did also was the UK version, the studio can output out. Not the Sony version that came out in the US. Yeah, no, I have a real soft spot for Fifth Element. It's just good fun. It's lighthearted. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it looks great. Although actually, since I'm allowed to go off on tangents, the interesting thing about that title is all these hardware reviewers for the longest time were using that to look at displays and DVD players and stuff. But it's actually it's an unusual choice because it's limited by the special effects work of the time. So if you look at, you can certainly see this on UHD Blu-ray. When now we have 4K display or UHD displays at home, every time it goes to an effect shot, the image quality is going to get that bit softer because all those effect shots are limited by whatever the best 4K. I think effects were scanned at 4K or 2K, might not have been. Those shots are limited by whatever the top of the range film scanning was at the time. And that's come on leaps and bounds since then. So you'll see effect shots which are they'll scan the original camera negative, they'll have done their work digitally, and then they'll re-output it to film. And then that becomes part of the film negative, and then that's scanned again to get a digital master for going into disc or streaming or whatever. So you're a couple generations down. But in the shots where all they've had to do is point a camera at Bruce Willis, that's first gen original camera negative stuff. So you can see very clearly the generational loss that you got from the best possible special effects work back in the day. Either way, it still looks great. You don't notice it much when you watch it.
So David, touching up, so you've mentioned a couple of things already. We talked about using tools like digital noise reduction. You talked about putting some filters on. What are your thoughts? Because I think we all thought with the invention of 4K, the sophistication of viewers now, we'd start to move away from those DNA cleaned up masters of DVD days. And we'd now be moving into the pristine, wonderfully organic looking, au naturel type images. But that's not the case. We're still seeing DNR, we're still seeing high pass filtering put on some of these images, and I think some of the ones that come to mind recently, obviously the T2 disc is a pariah among 4K discs, but even some recent Paramount ones such as Fatal Attraction and Planes, Trains and Automobiles. What's your thought on this? Are you a fan of these tools, or would you rather see none of this stuff applied?
Yeah. Are you a fan of Terminator 2 on 4K?
Do you take the lovely high ground in the middle somewhere? But just what's your thoughts on these tools and how they're used?
I obviously can't talk about any titles I didn't work on, but to answer your question, do you think I'm a fan of that kind of stuff?
So it's.
Let me also be really clear there. When I was talking about noise reduction earlier, I'm talking about bonus features and talking heads video interviews. We have never put noise reduction on a film. It wrecks the character of the image. It's called film for a reason, right?
Yeah, totally.
Sorry, I was hoping it was biting your head up there. How dare you suggest that? But
it's really interesting because what's your views now on why does the industry in general, why the studios just is it just money? Is it just that it's an old master they can't be bothered tidying up?
Is it automated?
So this whole practice of noise reducing masters goes back to the days where telecine, the process of converting film into video, was based around vacuum tubes. And as the tube aged, the signal to noise ratio of the device would get worse. So normally what would happen if there was going to be I'm talking about the 1990s and early 2000s here. Yeah. These things survived into the HD era. If there was going to be a film to video transfer done of like a top end Hollywood blockbuster, they would put a new tube into the machine so it was operating its best. So if the tube was aging, or they could also save money on these things as consumables by defocusing the scanning raster during the film transfer process, which they would never do in a Hollywood blockbuster title, I imagine. But the point I'm getting at here is that at the time, the film transfer machine itself introduced noise into the picture.
Right.
So there was an argument to be made for, and of course, also this is back in the days of tape, where you would be running the film through a telecine and it would be recording onto a studio tape deck. And in between those two devices, they would, a lot of post facilities, probably all, would have some sort of video enhancement box in there that was noise reducing the picture. So it meant that would be a money saving thing. Okay, so it's like, well, we can squeeze some more life out of this old CRT before we have to change, before Steven Spielberg comes in next week and we have to swap the tube out. We can get a little bit more mileage out of that. Now, starting with the late 90s, one of the biggest shakeups that happened in film transfer was the introduction of the original Spirit data cine. And that was the first kind of viable film transfer device, telecine, that used a CCD instead of a CRT as a light source. So it removed the need to try and conceal these performance errors as the machine aged. So that made things a lot simpler. I think the practice of just NR and everything continued for a little bit longer. I mean, you remember the early Blu-ray days where there were still a lot of DVD era masters kicking around.
Yeah.
I remember vividly, like before I understood all this stuff, when Serenity appeared on HD DVD, that was like the first high-def optical title I'd say. I was like, wow, this looks amazing. Because before that, you know, I think we all sort of thought, well, film is film, right? Every title is going to look amazing. This 35 millimeter film has such a better resolution than what we'd been used to before. And then we saw some of the early, reheated DVD era masters that didn't look very good. And then Serenity was the first one I saw that came from a digital intermediate, which meant that it was shot on film, but it meant that the film had been scanned, and then there was no other optical generation in between that. It was literally a scan of the camera negative with, then put onto, baked into master encoded for disc. Sorry, what was the original question?
I'm just listening to you going off on the tangent, David. It's brilliant.
Yeah. What was the question?
I think it was the idea that.
Sorry, NR. Sorry.
NR, yeah.
So also, I wouldn't. I think that's a battle that, for the most part, has kind of been won by the purist side. Like there have been a lot of there were a lot of titles that were subjected to noise reduction done in the 90s and 2000s, where studios are kind of looking at them and going back and redoing them and leaving them alone. And not always. There can be some good reasons to apply some sort of, the euphemism is grain management. Like if you're putting together a restoration, something like The Godfather, where there's no one good source for it, it exists in various different pieces, I can understand why you would want to level out the appearance a little bit. The thing is, though, that there's a big difference between something looking natural and something looking not. And a trained eye, or even the average person, well, you can tell right away when something's been noise reduced.
Yeah.
Even the filtering or grain reduced. The filtering, the algorithms are pretty good these days, but there's pretty good and there's natural. So why wouldn't you just leave it natural? Totally. For film, like the argument goes that, well, if you're looking at a scan of like a 35 millimeter camera negative, the grain is going to be a lot more pronounced than it would have been if you were sitting in a cinema watching the release print. And that is true. I mean, there's so many factors at play there because this just psychovisually, the experience of sitting at the back of a theater and watching a film projected. Of course, it's not film anymore, so I'm going back in time here. The grain has a very different appearance to looking at it directly on a small screen. You have so many other optical steps in the way that make it look different. So that's true. If you're looking at a direct scan of a camera negative that's been hopefully encoded to disk without losing too much in the process, that's going to look quite different to how the director intended to be seen. But at the same time, yes, the grain is more pronounced. The reason the grain is more pronounced is because all the details are more pronounced. Like all the sharp edges in the picture are more pronounced. So I think it balances out. I just don't think any of the arguments to apply blanket filtering to everything, none of them are convincing. I just can't lose too much and introduce too many motion artifacts in the process. So yeah, you can make the argument that yes, it's different to what would have been seen by audiences back in the day. But that applies to so many things, like having a display device, the quality we have now in our own home, is something that would be unfathomable to people in the 70s and 80s. So, how long is a piece of string? In the case of, again, I can't talk about any specific titles I didn't work on, but when there's a title that doesn't look the way you would expect it to, I wouldn't always assume that that's because it's been intentionally toyed around with. Sometimes, yes, like if you can spot telltale signs of filtering, okay. Sometimes it can be the case, though, that there's a materials issue, like the original negative or something close to it can't be located, or it's been damaged to the extent where it just wouldn't be viable to clean it up, and they have to go to some other element. Hopefully that's rare, because, you know, that's a film preservation discussion. But I think, no, you know my thoughts on. I'm trying to make film look like video. Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, did you ever see the documentary Side by Side? And it was all these filmmakers talking about the differences between film and video.
Is that the Keanu Reeves one?
Yes, interestingly enough, the Blu-ray I have of it here in the US. I need to be careful what I say. I seem to remember it's not very well encoded. So the differences between film and video are kind of dampened by the encoding a bit, but anyway, it's sort of thing. But it's no, either way, it's a really good watch. But there's someone in that, I don't know, I think it was a DOP or something, and he said it's very telling that no one ever sets out to people who shoot video always want it to look like film. Nobody who shoots film ever wants it to look like video. So there's your answer.
Great quote.
Yeah, there's your answer. Like
perfect.
If you really, really, really hate the way film looks, turn on the noise reduction in your TV. Leave it alone for the rest of us to enjoy this.
Definitely.
I've got a few questions about HDR, SDR, and DV. I was going to name some titles that you can't talk about, but now you mentioned Fifth Element.
Yeah,
it seems like a good example of. I think it had DV here and not in the US.
Right.
Was that the right way
Right.
around? And you did the one with DV.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your thoughts of SDR. Do we need HDR? Do we need HDR Dolby Vision? What do you think?
Do we need HDR? Well, I mean, do we need color TV? It's not a way I can really look at it. I think HDR is great. Yeah, it's weird with tell me how you feel about this. With going from SD to HD, it feels like HD was sorely needed. And I remember first seeing 720p HD and like, wow. Yeah. And when I first saw HDR, I think maybe it's probably just being a little older and more jaded, or maybe it's not. It doesn't always hit you at first.
No.
But then if you go back to the SDR version, it's like,
yes.
Yeah.
One much more noticeable on. I mean, I have to say, for me, the jump from full screen pan and scan video to a DVD on a bigger TV, it was that was a pretty seismic jump, and DVD to Blu-ray again. But like you say, in 4K with HDR, I mean, I've gotten used to the way it looks, to the point that when you put in something that isn't HDR, then you may be wondering what's missing there. And it's interesting that the titles that you can't talk about specifically, but the titles that are largely popping up that are SDR are kind of, very classics, very...
There's one I can talk about, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari for Eureka in the UK. That recently. That's SDR.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And that's a case of, I think that was seen as an ethical issue by
Isn't that what I said last week?
I think that, well, I mean, there's also the other thing to remember is that a lot of the time, I think viewers have come to expect some form of HDR on 4K Blu-ray. And if you look back at the CE side of it, the display side of it, the industry very quickly decided that just upping the resolution wasn't enough. So this decision's been made. Like there had to be something else in there to make this new umbrella of technologies appealing. So I think there is a bit of a viewer expectation going on there, but there are good cases like for not doing it. The other thing is that if you are just going to cynically dump an SDR title into HDR container so that the HDR light on the TV lights up, Similarly to doing a 5.1 up mix of a film where nothing happens on the rear channels and everything comes at the center speaker. It's effectively just mono.
Yeah.
If you were going to do, or not even talking about doing it very cynically, if you were going to do a very, very conservative HDR grade that barely went above 100 nits, it's actually better to encode that as SDR, because that way you're using the entire 10-bit range, the 64 to 940 pixel values to encode visible image information. Now, if you were to dump that into the ST2084 container and have nothing go above 100 nits, you would have a lot of, I can't remember off the top of my head what the code value of a 10-bit for 100 nits is, but you would be using a lot less of the steps of gradation for the sake of, because keep in mind that ST2084 is specified to go up to 10,000 nits. So, and it's of course the curve on there is such that I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but if you're basically, what I'm getting at is if you're not going to use HDR, but you just want the HDR thing to light up in the corner, you're probably doing yourself a disservice. Again, this is a theoretical discussion, right? I don't think if you could take 10-bit SDR and compare it side by side to the same thing just dumped into an HDR container, but barely going above 100 nits, it would not be miles apart. You wouldn't be looking at going, haha, look at that. I can see there are less steps of gradation. But in principle, that is the case.
Yeah.
But I think also you were asking about ethical issues.
Yes.
This was actually the first thing I thought of when I first saw the demos for HDR. It's like, well, this is really cool, but how do you deal with this when it's when we're discussing content that's been shot and originally graded and brought to the screen by people who aren't with us anymore? What are the ethical implications of this? I think it's I compare kind of to doing a 5.1 upmix of a mono movie. Like it's something that wouldn't have been intended by the filmmakers, but the technology is out there. So maybe people, it really depends. It's very hard to say. I think though it might be missing the forest for the trees a little bit, because again, you could make the argument that being able to view something so revealing as its direct scan of the original camera negative on a 65-inch display in your own home with zero black, I'm talking about all of it here obviously, with like almost perfect blacks and huge contrast ratio, that is already so different to the experience of going into the cinema in the 1970s or 80s. Yeah. And it's kind of like, it is. It's like, well, where do you draw the line on that? So I think honestly, if the argument here is one of absolute purism, we're already far gone from that point. And I think common sense is needed. Maybe colorizing Gone with the Wind is not the first thing that people should be doing. But I don't know. Was that done with the? Where it's HDR is one part of that bigger discussion, I think.
Yeah. No, that's a valid point. I think we're kind of at time, but Mark's got one final big question.
I don't mind going over, by the way. I don't if we have to be out of here, fair enough. But I'm good to keep talking.
Don't say that, David. We'll be keeping you talking till
we would actually keep you talking to the point where you wouldn't agree to return.
No. So I suppose, David, the big burning question that we have is we seem to be in. Everyone thinks we are in a glorious swan song of physical media. Everyone thinks that 4K UHD Blu-ray is the last format we will get. But I think there are some of us that think, well, it's going out in a hell of a blaze of glory with the quality that we've got, the titles that we've got. What's your view on where physical media is going to go from here? Is it simply bigger discs, more layers, more space, more megabits? Is it going to be the boutiques are going to carry on and pick up the slack from the major studios? Give us your, where do you think in 5 years' time physical media is going to be?
I can look at this very cynically. I think you probably have a hard time getting people to upgrade to another optical format, don't you think? I mean,
yes.
I would buy an AK. I would buy an AK Blu-ray player. I know you all would, but we're also at the point of, I mean, most of what I deal with is film, and a higher resolution is always better, provided nothing else suffers in the process. I think we're kind of at the point with 4K and 35 millimeter. We have such a good capture of of what 35 millimeter negative could do that I don't think resolution should be the focus. I would be very surprised if we ever saw an 8K Blu-ray format. Yeah. Having said that, I was surprised when we saw 4K one, because there were times where I could be very cynical and say, maybe it won't happen. It did. If there was some sort of 8K format, I think it would have to be something you could put in a 4K player and play a 4K picture from. It would have to be backwards compatible that way, and that would add a world of pain to the encoding and authoring processes. No, I think 4K is it. Never say never, right? I think with where when 4K BD first appeared, I actually for once I had a kind of market prediction that turned out to be accurate, and I didn't think that the people that are not interested in disc, I don't think that a new 4K I didn't think that a 4K format was going to change a lot of people's minds. But I did think that it would begin dividing the existing BD market up into people who want higher res, people who don't. I don't think any new format would change the landscape of physical media. In terms of where it's going, I think you're completely correct when you hint that we'll probably see more of the types of labels that I work with getting their hands on more and more stuff. Like, I mean, Disney's not going to license Star Wars out to anyone else, right? They're going to keep the crown jewels.
Not yet.
Not yet. But I mean, I think if you look back to how it was in the Laserdisc days, I mean, when was it in laser that Disney? I just to pick a random example. I'm not picking on them especially, but they partnered up with Image Entertainment to handle all their Laserdisc stuff in the US, and in the UK it was Encore. So I don't. Studios are hopefully aware they're sitting on all this intellectual property, and there are people who will always want a version of it on disc. They'll want the best quality, all the bonus features, all the behind the scenes stuff. And recently you saw them license Wall-E as Criterion.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's an interesting one.
And they came from nowhere.
Yeah, they got Wall-E, but they've then gone on the record and said like it's not going to be a pattern.
They've said that.
Yeah, but it's a shame, really. They said it was a favor to the director, but it's a shame because everybody responded with, "Well, maybe we'll get a whole bunch of." Criterion will start going back to the days when they released like Armageddon or The Rock.
I think that's where physical's going, because that's honestly the way that home video was for a while, right? You had the mass market who would go to Blockbuster Video and rent a VHS tape and return it. That's nowadays that's the streaming audience, and it's not to denigrate them. It's obviously people have different levels of commitment to this stuff. And then of course you had the people who had a Laserdisc player and would collect movies in that format. The parallels with what we have now with streaming and disc are very similar, I think. The difference is that the Blu-ray formats are way more successful than Laserdisc ever was from a sales perspective, and easier to manufacture, cheaper to manufacture as well, based on the size, if nothing else. I think it's if everyone is in a way fixated on that magical time in the early 2000s where the mass market and the enthusiasts were all buying the same format. Everyone was happy with DVD.
Very true.
And I think that was I don't think it's realistic to expect that that's the way it would always be. I think that really was a freak occurrence, that there was a product that was, and it came around at the right time. There was a product that really satisfied everyone in that way. Of course, you had people, mass market consumers for the first time complaining that there were black bars in their screens, but by and large, everyone was happy with DVD, and those two things were they converged for a while, and now they've split back out. You have a delivery method for casual film watchers. I like streaming video as well, by the way. Like if there's some documentary I want to watch once, it's great. A friend of the disk replication side of things put it to me best, though, when he said that consumers will stream what they like and buy what they love.
Yes.
I think that's absolutely true. So yeah, I would count on seeing more deluxe editions, probably more sub-licensing as well. I mean, if you look at the stuff Arrow is releasing at the moment, compare Arrow Video to what they were doing 15 years ago.
Yeah, they've got some choice titles in there.
They've got a lot more from
they're doing the RoboCop that Criterion used to do.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, to be fair, if Arrow keep releasing House by the Cemetery for the 19th time, I'll keep buying it. It's okay.
I mean, what do you think about the titles that we still haven't got? I mean, you're a lot more embedded in the industry than any of us could come close to. But as fans, you know, where's My True Lies? You know,
we all know where True Lies is, Kaz. It's in the same place as The Abyss.
Yes, exactly. What's going on? I mean, what do you see from your side as to titles that just seem to inexplicably? I mean, that skipped 2 formats.
Right. You know what? I'm still waiting for 4K BD Panic Room. I really like that film. What's the reason for that? I remember reading there was a technical reason. I think in both those cases, though, it's where the directors are very technologically savvy and don't want anything to go out the door without their direct involvement, I think is the reason. That's not most titles, though. I think it's the titles that are that where the director wants that sort of in-depth involvement. They're the minority, wouldn't you say?
So David, what's your dream title that you have yet to work on? You really just want to get your hands on. What is it?
I've actually seriously, and I've been so lucky in the last couple of years. I've actually got my hands on a lot of those titles. Fifth Element, I was so happy when that came through. Elephant Man was another. Mulholland Drive, I love that film.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Have them all.
There's a tangent I can go off on about Mulholland Drive if you really want, but I'll keep answering the original question.
No, we want the tangent on Mulholland Drive because we all love it.
So talking about, you asked earlier about things like per encode adjustments to difficult scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Briefly, with any sort of consumer compressed video format, I'm glad we got into the subject actually because it's something I forgot to talk about. So there's a length of frames is broken down into what's called a group of pictures. And that starts with an intercoded frame, which is kind of like a JPEG image where the whole picture is stored. And then after that point, up until the next group of pictures, all of the in-between frames are expressed by the codec by referring back to each other. So in other words, on Blu-ray and UHD Blu-ray, the group of pictures length is 24 frames. It's 1 second. So these formats send a full blast of information every second, and all the other 23 frames in between are calculated by none of the whole picture isn't stored. They're referenced to each other to reconstruct the parts that didn't get sent. Does that make sense? The whole temporal redundancy thing.
Wow.
So the bottom line is that usually BD and UHD BD, they refresh every second basically, and everything else in between is a convincing fake picture.
Yeah.
The reason for that is that you get higher quality at the same bit rate. Like if you could, if you wanted, just encode everything as an iframe, but then you have that on the UHD BD, you have that 100 megabits per second bandwidth video ceiling. So if you were to, it would be a very wasteful way to store the image, and the quality overall would get less. Except for there's this scene in Mulholland Drive. You know the film, right, where they go to the jazz club, and the whole screen turns black and starts flickering blue, and there's all this kind of random object motion, which really is not good for video compression. That was coming out with tons of artifacts in the chroma channels, which is actually can be quite a difficult thing to deal with film. And by the way, I'm talking about the Studio Canal version, which is different to the Criterion version that's on sale over here. This is the version used for UK, France, Germany, Australia. In that sequence, actually, the entire thing is iframes. The whole thing is intercoded. There's no, that just so that it's a very rare example of the temporal redundancy being shut off completely on consumer disc. That almost never happens. So in that sequence on the Studio Canal version that I did, it behaves a bit more like a digital cinema package you'd see projected when you go to the cinema. The frames are not referring to each other at all. Every frame for about that 90-second sequence where the lighting goes crazy is self-contained. There's no referring back to other frames at all. And that normally wouldn't work because, like I said, the amount of quantization needed would lower the picture quality completely. But in this rare case, because a lot of the screen is black, we could get away with it. So that's an example of that's an extreme case, and that's really, really rare. But we'll do other, like a lot of other tweaks involve the position of which pictures are iframes and which ones are predicted ones. Like in an obvious example, like there's a scene at the start of that same film where she's in the car and the screen flashes white really briefly as the headlights from the other car come up. And the first encodes, for some reason, the encoder hadn't assigned, the encoder had tried to predict the frame where everything lights up white from the other frames. It didn't produce as good a result. So I went back in and said, no, treat that like the start of a new scene. Treat that as the start of a new group of pictures because the picture is substantially different enough from the one before it. And that those kind of tweaks and decisions, they really raise the quality, even if it's only for a frame. Remember that the other frames are predicted off that frame. So if you have a bad frame, the errors can propagate across time. Anyway, hopefully it doesn't happen much. But you asked what were my dream jobs. Mulholland Drive was one. I love 2D animation, so I would love. The trouble is that like the Studio Ghibli movies, for example, like I think everyone's kind of in agreement Spirited Away is their best, right? The trouble is that's stuck in 2K forever because it was done digitally. So I'm not sure what HDR would bring to that because it's got such a sort of pastel color type aesthetic. I'd love to do more 2D animation on 4K Blu-ray and keep it looking like film, which doesn't always happen with certain very well-known American animated films don't always look like film when they're put onto disc, which is very, very technically impressive, but in my humble opinion, also wrong. So
Superb.
How about you? Is there anything you mentioned the Abyss? Is there anything you think needs to appear that hasn't?
I've just got a hard on for Cameron. I want Aliens, but I dread to think the nightmare of trying to get that onto a 4K disc would be with that film stock and all that smoke and.
It's pretty grainy. That looked really good on Blu-ray, didn't it? I remember before that came out. There was some PR snippet that went around that said it's been totally degrained. And everyone was thinking, oh, God, no. And then it appeared and it was like, wow, this looks amazing. So, smoke actually isn't as big a deal with 10-bit now. The things that were tricky in the 8-bit world, we've got everything's sort of flipped now. Because the trouble with smoke is that you need a lot of steps of gradation to show with avoiding banding. And we have those now. We have 10-bit video. It's weird. The more things change, the more these stay the same. The more things stay the same, the more things change. There's stuff that, and with enough experience in compression, you can kind of look at mastering and be like, okay, that right there is going to cause problems on the ABC version for 8-bit Blu-ray. Whereas there's going to be different things. I think it's fair to say less obvious things that cause trouble in UHD at 10-bit.
And so do you ever now just throw a disc on and just watch it and get immersed in it? Or are you can you just not spot the encode problem or the HDR issue or something?
Can I turn off? Yeah, I can actually. It's the biggest issue once again is time, is actually getting time to sit and watch a movie like that. It's hard for HDR, but the best environment to disconnect is to go to a cinema. And then it's kind of like the presentation's in somebody else's hands and you can just sit back and enjoy. And also there's so many less distractions. Like even if I'm completely in the zone and watching a film at home, on a nice big OLED, the lights are out, but every time the screen goes bright, it's still lighting up your living room. You're seeing everything else in there. So there's a lot to be said as there for going into a black box.
Definitely.
And, watching a movie and, like that.
Yeah. Top Gun Maverick.
That was good fun. Yeah.
Get off it, Kaz. It's gone.
No,
It's done.
I can't move past it.
We've got it forever. You can watch it whenever you want. Just leave it.
No, I need. I would like Michael Mann's, some of Michael Mann's other films on 4K. Done by David, actually.
Is there anyone in
like some
particular?
Peckinpah.
Maybe set in Florida,
Not
potentially.
People
Kaz.
who did Heat, but I'd like Manhunter. I'd go for Manhunter. Above
Wild Bunch,
but yeah.
something like that.
Yours is Wild Bunch. Nice.
Yeah.
That'd be SDR. I can tell you right now. Kino SDR. and we know it'll probably be
It'll look amazing.
Yeah. But yeah. But that's ours. Well, I think that was a fantastic session, and we've learned so much. Our brains are going to explode.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think.
So can we make David just a regular?
Well,
he can come back every week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wary of all of the reviews we're going to write from now on. Every time we're like, I can't believe the studio did this. It's just like there could be another reason. There could be,
Right. Yeah, I think the points I wanted to make is, and I don't know if I said this earlier, but no, I sort of did. I said compression can't make a bad master look good, but it can absolutely make a good master look bad.
Yeah.
That would be, if I could only say one thing about that. Oh, also, actually, one of the questions you were going to ask me, the way you worded it, I have a bone to pick with you. So when you actually said, and this is something, a point that's worth making, when you said, I think you talked about print damage. It's actually really, really rare for anything going to Blu-ray or UHD Blu-ray to come from a print. Prints are like at the bottom of the rung in terms of film elements. So I think I've handled a couple of titles that came from actual transfers of prints, but the dynamic range is usually not great. The resolution is often not great. It's really rare for a BD or 4K BD to be made from a print, just because they're not the optimal element. It really only happens if the original camera negative is gone.
Yeah, of course.
There's no better source. So that's like the so when you talk about print damage on this, it's actually kind of a misnomer. It's almost always dust and dirt on the original negative because that's usually what's getting scanned.
Like in the blurb on the Criterion discs.
You blame Criterion for that, Kaz, are you? Honestly.
Criterion had that template. They said thousands of instances of dirt and dust have been removed with the MTI restoration system. Right?
Yeah.
Students are still putting it on the front of some of their 4K discs at the moment.
Really? They put they count the number of pieces of dirt that got smacked up?
Yeah. They actually put the dust and dirt on the disc and sell it. Vacuum seal it.
The whole scanning and restoration side. Like I said, it's not my day job, but I like to have an understanding of all that stuff because it certainly doesn't hurt when you're dealing with the output of that. I've seen everything online from like people who think that compression is everything for getting a movie onto disc. And like I said, it is not of the same level of importance as scanning and restoration. But I kind of look at it as a sort of forgotten or not really understood step that if I had to classify, I would say that you could argue it's part of the restoration process, maybe. Because I mean, I've seen it happen where studios will they'll go to the expense of doing a whole new 4K scan off of the camera negative to get all the extra detail that was wiped out in the older master. But then, if it's not compressed properly, the compression so all the detail they just paid to get back.
Over.
Right. And it's not that when it's the smearing caused by like noise reduction or deliberate tampering of film grain that tends to be uniform over the whole picture. Whereas if you have loss of detail due to compression, it will be on a kind of on a block by block basis. So you'll get patchy bits of the grain coming back in some parts, and like occasional little grain particles that survive the process somehow coming through. So you get a very kind of uneven blotchy look to it. Don't know where I was going with that. that's what we try and avoid. Yes, blotches are bad.
Blotches are bad.
Oh, Kaz has gone all quiet.
Kaz is on mute. Look at him.
We're all very impressed.
Honestly.
Well,
the knowledge and by the titles you've done. I mean, I'm still marveling at the fact that we can't find a bad disc on there, and that there is something about that it is a mark of quality coming from you. I mean, in the comments thread on this very podcast, we got someone saying, got Robin Hood's Prince of Thieves on 4K. Great job.
That's such good fun. Yeah, that's such a fun movie. Are you fans? What are your thoughts?
I covered it, and we all love it. And it must have been hard working with that, because I think a lot of it was shot on location. And
no, the biggest issue with that is it's a seamless branching title. So the theatrical cut. The theatrical and director's cuts are on one disc. The most insane branching title I did recently. I think we've done more branching titles this year than ever before. The most insane one recently was for AVForums, Dragons Forever. The martial arts film, and there's three versions on there. All in Dolby Vision, all seamlessly branched. The thing with seamless branching on disc is that it's not just as simple as, it's a hell of a job in itself identifying which parts go where and what the redundant parts between versions are. But then you have to lay it out on the disc in a way that the laser can hop over the parts it's not playing. So it's not just as simple as throwing all your segments into a playlist and the player will sort it all out for you. Pardon me. It can be a lot of re-encoding work to make sure everything aligns around the splice point, and it can actually make a seamless connection. Robin Hood it's so worth it though, because I heard a lot of people. I'm sure I read a forum post somewhere where, is it true the theatrical version hasn't been released on disc before? That can't be right. Or not since the DVD days. I think the Blu-ray might only be in the extended cut.
Maybe.
So to be able to bring that back is great. That's also with that title. I took a look at for reference, we had the original Blu-ray versions, and it's always, especially when you're doing seamless branching stuff, it's always nice to compare it to an older master to make sure that is that hard cut there? Is that shot looked a little bit brief? Did something go missing? And we can compare back. But that's the older masters. I'm sure they're not from the negative, and they're not done on solid state film scanner. I'm sure they're old CRT telecine transfers, probably from late 90s or early 2000s. So this is probably the first time that title's had a modern film scan, if you like.
Yeah.
It looks beautiful.
It does. Well, done some tremendous work, and it's been great having you on. It has.
Thank you very much.
Superb.
It has. It is. It's. I think we've all anticipated it, and it has not disappointed. So I do hope that at some point in the future you get to come back on, talk about a few more of your titles. We'll try and read some books and be a bit more informed when
No, it's great. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk with the stuff with enthusiastic consumers of it, because I think the whole dystopian nightmare that was 2020 has obviously drove a wedge between everyone. So to talk to the people that are the audience for it is great. So thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Well,
and also I'm sorry that my the bandwidth failed, but like I said earlier, it's almost like a cautionary tale.
Yeah, it's all about encoding.
Yeah.
Have you been seeing freeze frames of me talking, or have we kept
Yes, some of them have been very funny.
I'm sure they have, yeah. I'm sure all the flattering ones have made it into the stream. I've been my most photogenic on this broadcast.
I'm just waiting for the forum post where David says, "Yeah, it didn't freeze at all. I was just messing with them. I just kept
later
a few seconds."
I'll release the podcast.
I don't understand why this has happened. I'm just relieved you guys could hear me okay.
It's been great.
That just shows you the bandwidth requirements of audio are nowhere near as big as video. I don't know what's doing this though. It's like no one else is here. It shouldn't be.
It's the revenge of a bad studio. But fantastic. Well, that is it for the AV Forums podcast this week. My thanks to both the hardware and the movie teams. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out when we publish our live streams, product reviews, and more. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook and bookmark avforums.com for the latest reviews, news, and videos. Plus, why not leave us a 5-star rating on whichever service you use if they allow it, but only if you enjoyed the show. I'm Kaz Harlow. Thank you for watching and listening and joining in, and join us for the next Christmas podcast, which I think is on the 19th.
The 19th.
Yes.